We're live. So, Coach, how you doing? How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Well, I'm fine. I almost thought we wouldn't be able to make it today because I was trying to reach you earlier and I wasn't getting a response. So I was even thinking of moving it. But thank God that you came through. I'm really, really excited for this, and I'm happy that you came through.
Absolutely. No, I agree too. And for sure, I was definitely compromised things that I was busy doing, you know, up to this point. Um, for me, it's the middle of the afternoon, so I am still getting back in my activities. What time is it where you are?
It's 8 minutes past 9,
8 minutes to
9
nine.
p.m.
Right. So you're
Past
all
9
settled
p.m.
in. You're all settled in for the evening, or at least all
Yeah.
of the lion's part of your day is moved on.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So
So
let's
I
see. It's now 9 p.m. If it's 3 o'clock here, it's nine where you are. Does that put you 6 hours ahead of me?
I guess so.
Yeah. And do you stay up very late? Do you?
Well, it depends. It depends. If I have something that has to keep me up late, I can. But most of the time, when I come back, I'm exhausted, and I just go to bed. So because the traffic in my city is terrible. So, but if there's any engagement that you want me to be a part of, definitely let me know. I'll make out time for it.
Okay, well that sounds good. I do have some things that I think that your input would be meaningful in for sure.
Okay.
For
Okay.
so our subject matter is interesting.
Yes. So remember last time during my last live stream, you made some comments about affirmative action, which I thought was
Mm-hmm.
interesting, and I said, okay, so let's have a chat about it. Let's talk about it. I'm going to. I don't think I really even know so much about it, but I will just assume that I know nothing about affirmative action. Usually affirmative action gets sort of a bad rap, especially amongst conservative circles, where some conservatives see it as nothing good, bigotry of low expectations, and so many things. Even black intellectuals like Glenn Lowry and the likes, they do say something like that about affirmative action too. So I just wanted to find out, at least from the way you spoke the last time, it seemed you have some sort of knowledge about what affirmative action is, and so I just
Mm-hmm.
wanted to talk to you about it. So first
Mm-hmm.
of all, what is affirmative action? Give me a rundown of what affirmative action is.
Okay. Um, I actually first want to start off with what affirmative action is not, because that is the real problem. Affirmative action often gets the reputation of putting people in positions who are unqualified. And that is simply not what affirmative action is. Affirmative action actually is the process of being intentional about looking for people who are in um, minority groups, whatever those groups may be, who are qualified, who may not normally be considered because they are not um, in the rotation, I will say. What do I mean by the rotation? Maybe they are not friends with the class of people who are de- deciding who's going to get hired. Or maybe they might they don't have a subscription to the particular journal and where that particular organization generally advertises. A good example would be um, NSBE. NSBE is the National Association of Black Engineers. All the engineers um, who graduate as engineers would be qualified for entry level positions. But so often there are organizations who state that they cannot find engineers. And so often there are engineers who state that they cannot find a job. So the process in affirmative action would be to marry that group with the people who have jobs so that they can hire black engineers.
Okay. Okay, so maybe we should take it to a territory that I'm sort of much more familiar with. Let's go to education. How does
Mhm.
affirmative action work with education? Because I know something like in terms of test scores into getting into Ivy League universities and things like that, the Asians have to score a certain amount of score, and the whites have to score something below that, and then the blacks have to score something below that. Is that an affirmative action? Is that affirmative action, or is that something else entirely? And if it's not, how does affirmative action work within the educational sector?
You know, I would say that it sounds like that particular organization decided to apply what they want to call an affirmative action policy um, in a bad way. Okay, so um, let's pretend, pick something that Black people normally excel in. Pick anything.
Okay, the stereotypical one would be say music and sports. But if there are others, so
Okay.
let's go with music.
Okay. So um, if I said to you that I have all of these Black children and they're um, extremely good at being a pianist. Okay, this is what they are good at. All right, and they are the major. They're the majority of people that are getting all the grants and that are getting referred into the program. They are black, but you were well aware that there were other people who had talents in those areas that were not getting they weren't getting the accolades, they weren't getting the information, and they weren't getting the access to doing that. And I said that, okay, you have to have already received a grant, or you have to I'm sorry, you have to already have received a particular accolade in order to get into my Ivy League School of Music. Well, these other children who actually could play that, play at the level, did not have access to that accolade. So it would be it would be cutting off the access to those children, even though they could meet the standards. So it sounds like that's the kind of situation that the school attempted to do, but because they put it in something measurable like a test score, it's frustrating because it's what it would make more sense to do is to look at the total package of a person and then give them points. Hello, Bradford. How are you? Um, and then to give them points for their package instead of only allowing for one single measurement to be the qualifying factor, because specifically in America you can have a wide range of ability and a low range of opportunity and access. Um, in America, particularly in this COVID situation, learning was to take place based off of the based off of having access to the internet as well as having access to a computer. Now, people who lived in rural towns and people who lived in inner cities had great difficulty with access to the necessary tools in order to learn well in the required environment. Now, that didn't mean that they were not as smart. That didn't mean that they could not get understand the information. What it did mean is that they had a lack of access um, to the opportunity to learn properly. So, if I said to you that every senior had to have taken their particular test over the internet in order to get into school, it would be clear to you that there was a disadvantage. Now, that disadvantage would not necessarily be off of race, it would be off of location and access. So it's easier for people to understand the situation when you don't think of a person in mind based off of their color or their gender. But when you start looking at their circumstances and their abilities, um, you get a better idea of what might be going on. And I do see two of my favorite people in the chat. I see Bradford and I see Steve. So that is great. I want to play for you something if you don't mind. Um, so I'm going to share my
Sure, go
screen.
ahead.
See here.
Renowned anti-racist advocate and writer.
That's not the right one.
How
Okay.
about we put people in jobs because they
Hold
are the
on.
most qualified? Let's
Hold on.
address
How
this.
many
How
people
many
we
people?
Can you, are you hearing that? Were you able to hear that?
Yeah, yeah. I could hear it,
Okay.
but I can't hear it anymore. It's up on the screen, but I can't hear it anymore.
All right. So hold on. I want to make sure I don't
Of the Harvard Law Review. As President Biden nominates Judge Jackson, a black woman, to the Supreme Court, people like Mike Brown complain. How about we put people in jobs because they are the most qualified? Let's address this. How many people know that of the 115 people confirmed to the Supreme Court, 40 of them were never a judge before being put on the Supreme Court? 18 of them never completed law school, and 47 of them never even attended law school. Meanwhile, Judge Jackson went to Harvard Law School, was the editor of the Harvard Law Review, was a judge for 9 years, and was a public defender. Oh, and she had 3 federal clerkships, including 1 clerkship on the Supreme Court. And it's amazing that while dozens of the 108 white men on the Supreme Court didn't even have a law degree, nobody asks about their qualifications, nobody questions their rulings or their judgments. But one black woman since 1789 has a potential of being confirmed, and suddenly people are worried about qualifications. The problem isn't that Judge Jackson isn't qualified. She is. The problem is the people who spend all their time claiming they don't see color suddenly do.
All right. So um, let's talk about what he's saying there. And this is just something that I experience as a Black woman. When you are in a position, people all of a sudden are worried about qualifications versus when the status quo, and in America, the status quo has been white male and then other males, you get inspected about your qualifications. And so for me, it feels like the reputation of affirmative action, the negative narrative about affirmative action actually belongs to the people currently in positions, because the good old boy system is the really has earned the reputation of affirmative action as it is currently stereotyped, in my opinion.
Okay, so let me just give my thoughts on this. Let me give my thoughts on the video you played about the judges and all that. Okay, now I myself would have issues with anyone questioning her qualifications based off of the fact that she actually is qualified and all that. But I think where many people's objection would stem from is because Joe Biden made it very clear from the outset that he was going to pick not just a female judge, he was going to pick an African American female judge. So it seemed like to him the most important criteria was both gender and race. You understand? He could very
Mhm,
well have picked her without even mentioning that he was going to pick someone of that description. You understand? And I would have
mhm,
been for it. I have no issues with him picking all that. But it just seems like this is almost like tokenism. This is almost like, you know what? I'm going to pick a female and I'm going to pick a black female. How about Joe Biden say, you know what? I have considered all the people that I have that I could possibly nominate. This is the person I feel is most suitably qualified to handle this position. So he is the one that is actually undermining her by bringing in her race and by bringing
mhm,
in her gender. Those are two things that they have no bearing whatsoever in her qualifications and her ability to dispense her duties. You understand? So him bringing that to the forefront. To some people, it seemed like so those are the most important factors. So you have to be female, you have to be black, and you think you just. How about bringing in the most qualified person? You understand? So that is the way I would see that kind of objection being making any sort of sense. You understand? But it still doesn't make so much sense because for anyone for Joe Biden definitely is not going to just pick any. He's not going to just pick any black person or just pick any female to put there. He's definitely going to consider someone who is qualified. But I just think that this identity politics should be taken out of politics. It doesn't matter her race, it doesn't matter her gender. You might have it in the back of your mind that this is what you want to do, and you might know this is why I want to do it. But coming out to announcing it, it just undermining her. I think it actually doing her more disservice than it is doing her service.
mhm, mhm. So I do believe that the execution of Joe Biden could have been better. He could have said that I am going to pick the most qualified person. Um, at the same time, I think he, you know, may have been met with some of the same resistance. And so I want to look at it this way. Um, so often, white males are hired for really amazing positions and they simply are not the most qualified. Sometimes they are, but quite often they are not. And it's just difficult to
Okay, so
we,
I want to add something to that. Can I add something
uh-huh.
to that?
Yes, uh-huh.
Okay, so one thing I should have mentioned is that I don't even think that it's the most qualified person that usually gets the job most of the time. I think at times it's who you know, at times it's the circles you run with, at times it's also the your political ideology. For example, Joe Biden is not going to pick a conservative leaning black female judge. He's not going to do that. You understand? So definitely political ideology also comes into play there. So, but I think that most people that get those kinds of job, they at least meet a minimum level of competency, because if you truly want to find the most competent person to do a certain job, you might never you might never be done with the selection process, because I think there are way more people in any job, even with the president of the United States. I think there are more people who are much more competent than he is in any position. I think there are more people who are more competent than the people that are currently there. But anybody is going to be selected for that position has to have at least a minimum level of competency to be able to discharge that duties, which I think um, George Brown, Jackson Brown, I think she meets that requirement. So definitely, it's still well within Joe Biden's right to nominate her. Yeah, and I also get your point that yes, some people would still always come up with that objection. It's politics, and people are going to play dirty. Remember during the time of Brett Kavanaugh, something came up too. You understand? What came up was that he apparently raped or sexually assaulted
Let me show you what
a
it
woman. You understand?
It did
So
comprise
Uh-huh.
98% of the
Hold on.
United States
I'm
so
sorry.
presidents. Meanwhile, white men.
so the thing is that people are going to look for things that they can use to attack you. For example, it will not make sense to come out and say George Jackson raped someone because she's a female. Nobody is going to listen to that. So also they are going to look for something that's specific, something they think they can use to bring you down, that's specific to you at that point. And it might have nothing to do with you per se. It might just have everything to do with power, because
Mm-hmm.
it's a game. The conservatives definitely, they want to push their own agenda, and the liberals also want to push their own agenda. So it's just a battle. It's a battle of ideas and ideology, and at times people get dirty, even if that's not the mod. Might Someone might bring up a racial tone, racial stereotypes, and all that, even though racism is not the motivating factor for that, but because they know that will be the most effective tool at this point in time, they're going to use it. So that's the way I feel about things like this. So I think that Joe Biden should have, after all, he's the president. What is he going to lose by not saying anything? He wasn't running for election anymore. He could have
Mm-hmm.
just, this is the most competent person I can find at this point in time to do this job. You understand? And let her go through the process.
Mm-hmm. So I think what you're talking about is messaging versus outcome. Okay. Yes, he could have simply said that um, he was going to choose the best person for the job. Okay. And that would have been fantastic. He decided to send a specific message that he was going to pick a black woman for the position. I don't like his messaging, but I don't like a lot of things that Joe Biden does. And so that's neither here nor there. At the same time, I still think that even if he had proper messaging, they would have questioned the idea of it being um, and affirmative action hire, so to speak. And I say that because of my experience as a hiring liaison, you know. Um, and I want to go back to this idea of someone being a right fit. I also want to go back to the idea of, of qualifications, and I want to go to the idea of exception to policy. Okay. So, over and over in my hiring career, um, as well as colleagues that I know very well, we present people based off of a qualification list. Um, Foreign medical graduates, um, and different healthcare professionals, and they meet the criteria. But so often we are told, well, you know, they just don't seem to be a right fit. Oh, our company culture uh, doesn't seem to match their attitude. Oh, keep looking, keep looking. And so you're looking for a person. And so then you get a CV or a resume, whatever kind of position it is, and you talk to someone and you can tell they're a certain kind of person, okay? And you get and you do their interview and they have um, the right look. But you see they're missing a credential, all right? But you put them forth anyway, and they get a exception to policy. Now, here you are, and you've presented several people who have checked every single box, but then you present someone, and an exception to policy is made. And to me, that is that is propelling the status quo, and you get more of the same kinds of people in the positions. And in America, the dominant culture is white male. And it's not against white males. That's not the issue. The issue is when we don't actually push towards correction. And so I think that was Joe Biden's intention. Do I think he could have done a better job of it? Absolutely. Am I happy with his pick? Yes, I am. It brought me to tears to see her there.
Okay. Now, okay, before we go back to affirmative action, because I want to ask why does affirmative action have such a bad rap? But before we go back to it, now this scenario which you painted, if I understand it correctly, is that you you are involved in the hiring of people, and then you have noticed sort of a disparity in the attitudes of people, uh, those you are trying to hire for, when you are bringing in, say, black folks who meet all the criteria in terms of qualifications, but you are getting the excuse they are saying, it doesn't quite fit our culture, it might not fit our culture, and then you're bringing in a white person who might not have one or two qualifications, and then they're making an exception for them and hiring them. Is that what you're saying?
Hmm. Almost, because it's not just a black and white thing. Um, I focused on foreign medical graduates. I specifically mentioned foreign medical graduates for a reason, because I have physicians, people who have gone to school for almost the majority of their lives, and they are othered, and they are told they are not a right fit. and people don't want to hire someone who has an accent, um, and things of that nature. It's very frustrating. And so here you are, you're going to make your patients wait for um, a neurologist or a gastroenterologist because you're waiting for me to hire someone of your culture. And that culture may be a rural white culture, but that is what you're waiting for. And I'm telling you, that is
Do you usually ask them what they mean by that when they say someone wouldn't quite fit their culture? I mean, they haven't interacted with this person for any considerable period of time. So how do they know that this person is not going to fit their culture? What
oh,
exactly are they looking for? Do you ask them that question?
you know, people are very good at dancing around that particular idea. But there have been times when people have told me off the record, so to speak, um, they just don't want, a towel, um, a towel head in there.
They don't
That
want a what?
a towel head, someone who wears a garment on their head, a head wrap on their head. You know, now for me, that is insulting, frustrating. Um, but you have to remember, I'm working with a hiring manager and a group of people, and they can always hide behind credentials. They can always hide behind uh, patient uh, patient satisfaction and the phrase "good fit." And what that really means to them. And so they can use a bunch of soft terminology, or they can just come right out and say what it is they are looking for. And as clients, what is very easily done is either A, they can, they can complain about, oh, you haven't filled our person in X amount of days, even though you presented, 10 qualified candidates. So they can complain on that side, or they can write a review or a report that says, oh, um, Erica really understands our community and does her best to provide qualified candidates um, that provide great patient care. Now, none of what I just said sounds like trigger language, or it doesn't sound like someone's being discriminatory in any way, but I know they are. I know exactly what.
I have a similar experience, a similar story. I think I must have shared it before. In the first company I worked for, no, the second company I worked for, just before I left the company, I was in the HR. It was the HR office, and the HR was calling someone. She was trying to fill a position, and she kept insisting that the person must be from a particular tribe. She was saying, "I need this must be Igbo. I need this must be Igbo, must be Igbo." So I was very surprised. So when she was done, I was like, "Why were you so insistent in having an Igbo person fill this position?" And she just told me that, say, that's what the MD wants. Now, the MD is an Igbo man, and he wants to surround himself with, his tribesmen. I am not Igbo, but I was able to work there. And sure, there are other people there that are not of his tribes that he has is employed. But in certain key positions, he just wants people from his tribe.
Hmm.
It's a terrible thing. It's a really really terrible thing, and I really don't know why human beings do that, because just based off of someone's qualifications, you should be able to do that. You should be looking at what can this person do, what value can this person bring to this job, not just their ethnicity, their race, their gender, or something like that. So it's a really big problem, and I can understand. I see that what you're saying is true because I have even seen it in practice. I've seen it in experience in my country. You understand? So when you have a when you have a place that is dominated by a certain culture, people in charge of that culture might want to preserve it. It's a human thing. Frankly, I think it's a human thing. Only people who have, sort of sort of retrain themselves are able to look past the superficiality, to look past the superficiality of race, of gender, of ethnicity, and all that, to just say, let me hire the best person for this job. And I think it's a fight that we need to keep. So we need to keep fighting and calling it out every time we see it because it's really, really bad. It's not good.
You want to know something? This is a fact in my eyes. Affirmative action is not a perfect system. It is not. And so I can find problems with affirmative action. But this is the issue. It's the best solution that's been put forth as of yet. And one of the major problems that affirmative action has not yet fixed is the fact that Black women earn 64 cents on the dollar for every white man. White women earn 84 cents on the dollar for every white man. And we're talking people with the same qualification for the jobs. It would be a delight for me that people put as much energy, effort, and ideas towards fixing the problem of equal pay as they did in picking apart the idea of affirmative action. Affirmative action is simply one type of solution. So I am not necessarily so pro affirmative action as I am pro fixing the problem. We have a real problem here in America, and it's not a female problem. It is a family problem. It is a community problem. And I will give you an example of why I say that. Because a woman earning less money to bring in the household now has a family that she's trying to support based off of that lower income. Maybe she has a son. Maybe she has a husband. But whatever that means there's less money that she is earning, that she should be earning, that is going into the household, therefore is not going into the community, therefore tax dollars are not being made and paid on that money. And the only organization that is winning is the corporation that has the um, good fortune of being able to pay someone anywhere between 16% and 36% less. And those funds are going directly to their bottom line. So I don't think the question is about affirmative action so much, but how are we going to solve these problems? I could care less if affirmative action stays in place or not. I do care if you find me a productive solution. Find me a solution to these real life community problems, and then that is the one I will support. But at this juncture, affirmative action is the only solution that's on the table. So my question is, why are we picking it apart instead of figuring out a way to find a solution to these problems?
Okay. So let me just respond. But I wouldn't want us to get into the gender pay gap discussion. We're going to
Why?
have that
The
discussion another time.
affirmative action is part of that. Affirmative
Well,
action is a part of
well,
that.
because I obviously I don't subscribe to the gender pay gap. I think it's I don't think it's a I think it's a misrepresentation of statistics anyway. But let's not get into that. Let's focus on affirmative action squarely. Now, in my country, we have something similar. Now, the northern part of my country, in terms of education, is they're much more backwards in terms of the education compared to the southern part of my country. So, in order to bridge that, to make more northerners go to school, what they do is that for certain universities, the northerners, if they score a lower, there's a certain no the southern have to score a higher mark to get into the same university that a northerner would score a lower mark for. You understand? And some
Hmm.
people don't like it, some people like it, and all that. But by the end of the day, what he does is that many of these northerners who are let into the universities with these lower scores, because they their foundation is not really that good, it's not really that strong in the first place. They they will go through the university and there's not much change, there's not much impact. You understand? And I think it's a bad policy because you are making an intervention at a place where it is almost too late. I think such interventions should be made at the very grassroots fundamental level of, maybe from the kindergarten, improving access to education for them at the kindergarten level, to the primary level, to the secondary level, such that by the time they get to where they want to get to universities, they are just as competent as people from the south. You understand? But not that their foundation is not good, they have not learned so much, and then you want to take them into the university and you just bring down the bar for them to get into the university. So I don't know if that the same thing that is at play in the US in terms of affirmative action. Are people being let into certain positions with a lower qualification, or is it just that certain positions, maybe a certain percentage, maybe there are, let's say, 15 slots are left exclusively for this category of people, but they have to be qualified, they have to be just as qualified. Another example with my country passed a law some few years ago that there are certain spots that will be left for women in our House of Assembly, the Senate, and all that. So maybe 25% of those seats must be filled by women. But those women have to be competent, they have to be good. You understand? So it isn't that they're just picking any woman off the streets. At least 25 is guaranteed, but you have to get the best women or the women who are just as good as the men to fill that position. So is that how affirmative action operates in the US, or is it just, um, we're lowering? Is it lowering the standard, or is it keeping a certain percentage fixed for a certain group of people, but they have to be just as qualified as the other people who affirmative action does not work for? So which is it?
So it depends on the application of, of the policy. So the deal is you can make your affirmative action goals any way you choose. So if I want to run my business and I'm going to pretend like I'm Joe Biden and I'm going to say, I'm only going to look at Black females for this position. I've already said, I don't agree that that is the very best way to apply affirmative action. Do people apply it that way? Absolutely. Do people misapply the overall standard for hiring? Absolutely. Which one is done more often? The latter is done more often. Okay, so I want to make that clear. But the purpose of affirmative action is to create correct certain issues such as pay gap problems. And I want to hover over that because we do have a question here in the chat. Melinda says that she believes that it would be illegal to pay someone like a white male who works in the same job um, a higher rate than a black female, and that is incorrect. You have a pay scale, and then if you hire a black woman in at the lower end of the pay scale, and um, thereby, and then hire a white male at the higher end of the pay scale, you have still stayed within the pay guidelines. Now, if you give a 10% raise based off the baseline of the hiring, not only will that white male be hired in at a top rate versus the black female being hired in at the bottom rate, his pay will grow substantially faster and outpace her very quickly, well within the law. And that's just one really basic, basic example of that. And then that's not to speak of bonuses and things of that nature. And
Okay,
go ahead.
so you're telling me that in America there's a pay range for any particular position. Let's say position X, the pay range is between $1,000 to $1,250. It's still within the same pay range, and the employers can decide to pay the white man $1,200 for that position and pay the black woman 1,150 or 1,100. Is that what you're saying?
100%. And then I want to point out that that is a best case scenario. That is a best case scenario. It is more likely that there is a budget for um, the year, and you can spend the budget however you want. You can spend the budget however you want. So you can very well let's say that I'm hiring for a lab technician, okay, and I can decide that these schools, people from these particular schools, get higher pay, and people from X schools get lower pay, or I'm giving people from these particular school bonuses. Now, if those particular schools are all boys colleges, or if those particular schools are predominantly white colleges, and you don't, we have something in America called historically black colleges, and you don't give any of those incentives to historically black colleges, there are very easy ways and easy practices that nobody notices unless you are in the field inspecting it. And quite honestly, once you inspect it, there is no law or rationale other than, oh my gosh, that's not right. You can kind of get concerned about it, but there's no law that says it's wrong. You know, you can give preferences to your alma mater.
So you're telling me that aside a certain pay scale, there's also a the pay differentiation between people who have attended certain schools as against other schools. Is that what you're saying?
There is certain schools, there's certain clubs. Um, there there is a long list of different rationales why people uh, pay more for certain individuals. And it's also And I'm even leaving out basic negotiations, just basic in general um, negotiations. So it is almost par for the course.
Hmm. This is interesting. This is really interesting because in my country, at least in government service, there is a pay. There is a, how do they call it again? There's a pay grade, you know, and within each grade, there everybody within the same grade level, they are paid the same, irrespective of, you know, gender, irrespective of ethnicity and all that. Yeah, there's a pay scale, as in that's it's fixed. For example, if if you are in level, you're level seven, and level seven is receiving 300,000 300,000 naira per month, everybody within that level is going to be receiving that amount. You understand? But I don't know how this works in America. I don't know. It's just bumming me up that something like this can happen where, based on the school that you've gone to, I mean, in my country, based on the school that you've gone to, you might be, how will I call it? You might, certain schools might be favored in terms of employment, but it doesn't mean they would be paid higher than someone from another school. If the employers think that this school has more credentials during the selection process, okay, they are more likely to favor this school which they think has more credentials and possibly hire from them. But when they get to hire someone from another school which is not as prestigious, they're not going to discriminate against them in terms of their pay just based on the school they went to. So I don't know how that is working in America, and it's not illegal. It's
It's
wow.
not illegal at
But
all, and it's called capitalism. And people, we have a lot of right to work states, and people can hire people for any reason that they choose, and they can pay them what they desire. And
do you
it's not.
have do you have any data you can share with me on this?
Mm,
Because I
I
really
can
want to look into the data.
I can look for data for you. I can look listen. I can put that on my to do list. My to do list is long, but I do think data would be interesting to look at. I will share with you. I mean, right now we're using a Google product, but
Mm,
Google in this moment is in a situation to where they are being accused of um, oppressing minorities and pigeonholing them into low level positions. So let's say I have two people and they have the exact same qualifications. And over and over again, I put the white employee in the position one level up, and that pays a little more. And I put the black person in the position one level down. Now, that um, that isn't what's happening one time is kind of not a big deal, but if it's happening systematically, it becomes a big deal. And then in addition to that, if I say now I'm only going to recruit from the level 2 position, which is a higher position, I'll say um, for promotions. Well, if I've systematically placed all of my minority positions in level 1 jobs, then I've created a criteria that is only going to promote a certain type of person. Now, I've explained that way more simply than it actually is, but at the same time, Google is facing this exact type of problem. Before I go, I want to give a big shout out to Morehouse, which is where Mr. Palu graduated from. That is an exceptional school, and so that makes me excited. It is a great college, but it doesn't have the wide reputation that it deserves, because some very significant people who have graduated from Morehouse, and they have an excellent education system
Wow,
there.
that's cool, Mr. Pelu. Shout out to your school. That's great. Coach Love, let me just say, this will be. Let me put this. Maybe this might be my last question to you before I open up. I don't know how much long you have. You can hop off, or you can still stay a bit for us. So my question is, why does affirmative action get such a bad rap in America? Why does it get such a bad rap?
Well, you know what? I don't think it has a bad rap in as it relates to me, but I will point out two negatives. Number one, and I said this before, affirmative action is a bad solution to a even worse problem, but it's the only one that we have on the table.
Wow,
So
that's
go ahead.
a bad solution to an even worse problem. That's
But it's the only
that's
one we have
quotable.
on the table. Yeah. So
Mm,
I guess that pretty much sums it up. And so that's why I really would like anybody who has a desire to talk about affirmative actions and its downfalls. I want them to put in place a solution that works 100%, and doesn't have any downfalls. You know, and of course, Steve, he came up with an idea, and he talked about, you know, not putting names on resumes, and things of that nature, and only interviewing via via the internet. And that might be great if we lived in an authoritarian society, but we are in a capitalistic society, and there's no way to enforce those kinds of policies that would not rip our country apart.
mm.
So
Well,
if you think that people do not tolerate affirmative action very well, my gosh, try to tell them how they are a small business owner, try to tell them how they are supposed to interview their employees. My God, I think they'll do more than shut down the highway.
mm, mm. Wow, man, I don't know. This is sort of distressing. It's distressing for the reason that if there's so many loopholes that people can take advantage of to sort of institute some form of discrimination, then it's not good. It's not. It's really not good. But does this play out also in government service, in
Of
government
course it
employment? Does this
does.
play? Wow,
Of,
it does.
of course it does. But I want to say this to you. Um, this is the bottom line issue. We are looking for a head solution for a heart problem, and it simply doesn't work that way.
So, what would you propose? What would you propose as an alternative to affirmative action?
At this particular juncture, I don't have a perfect solution. I don't have any solution that wouldn't cause as much problems as affirmative action does. What I can say is this: we can try to use affirmative action better. We can be smarter about how we use affirmative action. We cannot make blunders like President Biden did, because anytime you shove something down someone's throat, they're not going to like it. There's a
Okay.
phrase that says, "Oh, he said the quiet part out loud." Perhaps he should learn to be quiet.
Mm. So, if it were up to you, how would you want affirmative action to? How would you want affirmative action to work? Just give me the steps. This is how you want affirmative action to work.
Hmm. I'm sorry, I was distracted because I was reading the side chat, and Steve said he didn't understand why his idea wouldn't work. I'm not saying it doesn't work, darling. I am saying that it's not enforceable. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm imagine telling business owners that you can only interview people based off of the internet, um, and you couldn't have them, come in, and you couldn't use their names. You had to um, use their, do something blind on the resume. I am not saying that's not a good practice within a company if a company decides to adopt that. Adopt that. What I'm saying is it's not enforceable by law as a overall practice. So it's not that it doesn't work, it's just not enforceable.
Okay. So, my question: how would you enforce affirmative action? What are the steps you take? What would you take away from affirmative action? What would you add to it? How would you make it better?
You know, um, in different governments, like they might say that you need to have X a number, X a number of black females, um, or disadvantaged people from a disadvantaged population, or females in general, in order to get these particular tax dollars. I might be more interested in the people that you have. I want to audit their pay. I want to know how much, where are the pay gaps within your organization? And then I would be more interested in if the people that you currently hire all meet the qualifications. And then do your qualification occasions allow for people who need to grow into those positions, and then how many exceptions were made to policy, and who were those exceptions made for. And I really might start off with who were the exceptions made for, and specifically looking at who's being paid what. So that would be
Okay.
a good start for me.
Wow, that's interesting. So for me, however affirmative action is working currently, this is the way I would want it to work. If, for example, we have 100 spots to fill, and we have 1,000 candidates, and out of those 1,000 candidates, 900 of them are, let's use race for example, 900 of them are white guys, and 100 of them are black guys. Most likely, just by sheer numbers, the white men would fill all the positions. But because I don't want that to happen, because okay, I want some form of representation. What I might do, I might say, okay, out of that 100 positions, 30 positions are going to be for black people. But the 30 black people I'm going to consider from the 100 black people that we have, they have to be just as qualified as the 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 70 white guys that are filling the other spots. So for me,
I want to
even though
pause
I'm
one
reserving.
second. I want to pause for a second, and I'm not prone to interruptions, but
Mm,
I cannot let that lie without saying this. I would say the 70 white guys need to be just as qualified as the 30 black guys, because
okay, okay,
I personally see so many exceptions being made for the majority. And it is generally whatever the majority is. I want to be clear, it is not only, um, white companies that do this, or people. When I say white, I mean people who have majority owned white companies. I see organizations that are majority black owned do the same thing. You know, it.
Okay,
I
so
just the qualifications for the majority need to meet the exceptionalism of the minority.
okay, so maybe I could have I should have put it this way. Now both parties, both sides, if those that are affected by affirmative action and those that are not affected by affirmative action, they have to meet the minimum level of qualification, the best minimum level of qualification to be able to do that job. So maybe they are going to take a test, and the test is from maybe 1 to 10, and the minimum you need to be able to get to enter that, to get that position, say it's a 7, then the black guys, the 30 black guys that will be selected should get at least that 7, and the 70 white guys that will be selected should get at least that 7 as well. So they all have to be able to meet that standard before anybody is hired. That is the way I would that's the way I would implement
Hmm.
affirmative action, because even though I want representation, I also want the best, and I believe that you can always get the best from whatever sample that you are, from whatever category of people you are looking at. If you are
Hmm.
looking at women, you can always get the best from women, but you have to just look closer, look, in more detail, not just the fact that, oh, this spot is left for women, so you just bring in any woman. No, they have to be able to meet the minimum level of competency. And with that, I think I'll be fine with it.
So I think that is, I think that is good, um, Charles. The only thing I'm going to say is this: um, sometimes you have to use more than a number on a piece of paper. I think you have to have maybe a package, several different things, and then you come up with um, a final
Sure.
number. So yeah, so maybe not just one test score. Um,
No, I was using test scores as an example. So they're
yeah, I just
definitely going
wanted,
to be.
and I
Mhm.
believe that I believe that you're there. I just wanted to make sure that I say that. And thank you, Steve. Oh, there you go. I was just reading your comment about anecdotal evidence, and unfortunately it is very hard to get things statistically measured. And then you know what happens when you do the statistics? You get this response: oh, well, you can skew statistics to say anything you want. And so it's like six and
Yeah, I've
one.
said that. I've said
Yeah,
that many times, and I think it's it's true. People can
exactly.
skew statistics.
Exactly. And so sometimes for me, particularly in this situation, it's I tell the story because the story is, I mean, you can look at the story in itself. And then so if you say in the story, well, what about this? I can answer that question for you. And maybe you agree that the other person was, doing the right thing, but the facts of that particular story are the facts of that particular story. The problem is if it happens over and over again, you end up with a trend, and then what some would call flawed statistics.
Now,
No, that is
coach,
so true.
yeah, sorry, Steve. Let me just put this in before you jump in. Now, what you described today sort of varies from the sort of the statistics that I am used to or I have seen, because the sort of statistics I've seen as regards this gender pay gap, only it's more, it's not even comparing people within the same industry, or people within the same job doing the same level of work, the same grade pay and all that. It's just comparing the averages of, earnings of men and the averages of earnings of women, and then saying there is a disparity. So in that regard, but what you're saying is more targeted towards, even within that level itself, even within that same level itself, there is a pay disparity, which would actually make sense to be called a pay gap if that actually happens. But
Yes, that
why hasn't anybody done that? At least to what I have seen, why hasn't anybody done that? Why have they just been doing these aggregates, measure all the earnings of all the men? Maybe in the room you have 10 men and 10 women, without regard to the type of job they did. You just measure their earnings and you take the average, and then you say, oh, based on this average, the men are earning more than the women, so there's a pay gap. I think that's a terrible use of statistics. But if you can prove, or you can give me evidence for the position that you just stated, then I will be willing to change my mind on that. But until then,
okay. That's fair enough. Stephen, I hate to step on you in this particular way, but
Go ahead.
I want to get this out here. Um, there are things that women can do to help the situation. And this is something that I've noticed just in my many years of hiring people. Women ask for more money. Women negotiate. Women, ask your male colleagues how much they make. Men offer the information, and then women tell other women how much you made and how you were able to get more money, and then what options are available to them. I want to leave people with those solutions because um, as a as on the recruitment side, the HR side, my job is to save the company money. So if you fail to ask me for more money, if you fail to ask me for a relocation bonus, and I have it, you're not going to get it. So
mm,
on that side, please ask.
so one more question. Do women ask as much as men? Do women ask as much as men for a
No, that's
raise,
my
for
point.
bonus?
No, no, no. That's my point. That is the point I
Oh,
am
so
making.
that
That is
that
the
might be
exact
a
point.
factor in why, that might be one of the factors even
Right,
in the disparity itself.
right. So that I am saying that specifically because the fact of the matter, I have it just makes me laugh. You know, I will get a man who will ask me for something that he in no way deserves. And then I will have a woman come in who is very deserving of it, and you know, a a a raise or a bonus will never even be mentioned, and it's not
Wow.
my. I'm not in a position. My job is to save the organization money. That
Can I
is,
echo what Coach is saying?
yeah.
So when about 5 years ago, my wife was making about $10 an hour. Went to school. She was making 15 after she graduated and got her certification, and she just was having a really difficult time moving up financially. And then we talked about it, and we discovered that she just wasn't being aggressive enough. And so what I recommended to her, I told her, you know what, go to your boss tomorrow and ask him what you need to do to make more money. And you keep doing that about every 6 months. And now she makes $1 less than I do.
Mm-hmm.
So within 5 years, she went from, barely, $28,000 a year to now she makes, I think it was like 58.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes just demanding the money, you know, being able to walk in there and being aggressive about wanting to make money shows to an employer that you have a vested interest there, that you have a desire to do what they want you to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it really does increase your ability to make a reasonable wage. So I totally agree with you. And I've done that to numerous women, and I've helped them get more money and learn better strategies about how to get money the exact same way I do. If my employer doesn't want to pay me as much as the next guy, I'll find a different employer. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
there's bargaining chips that we can use.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be something that women have been missing out on historically, is just not being aggressive enough.
Right. And I don't think that
And not
women.
having men like me to support them.
Well, that's true. You have to be trained into doing that. That is one way that I help women. I never tell women to be aggressive, though. I always tell women to be assertive. Aggressive is not a helpful narrative for a woman. Aggressive is certainly not a helpful narrative for a foundational Black American female.
Well,
That
I mean aggressive in the sense of aggressive for themselves, not aggressive to their boss.
No, even aggressive for
So,
myself. That is not uh that is not a good word or narrative that I would want a female, or particularly a Black female, to use, because I'm going to tell you that narrative will be weaponized.
oh,
Um,
absolutely. You and I both know that, racialized black women have gotten the short end of the stick when it comes to that. And, they've always been told that you're too aggressive. And now that stereotype has been established, they have to play by a different game, which I think is bullshit. I think it's
mhm,
incredibly unfair, and I completely agree with you that it shouldn't exist. One really quick thing before I go, because I got to get back to work. I actually agree with a lot of what Coach said, even though I have philosophical and logical and reasonable disagreements with affirmative action. I think affirmative action is a good system as best as we have right now to be able to kind of equalize past discrimination and try to help the system force it to realize that there's other people other than racialized white people in the job market. So I actually agree with Coach Love with affirmative action. I wholeheartedly support it, and I have for decades. And I wonder when we will make the decision that we've reached a point where we no longer need it. That's kind of the problem that I have, is we don't have any criteria where we can say, okay, we're good. We've done it. And on top of that, I think we need to be listening to what Coach is saying about both her experiences and much of what you would consider the lived experiences of people who don't look like us, because we'll never know what they experience in their daily lives. And so we need to be honest with ourselves and say, okay, the term lived experience has got a bad rap lately, but we still have to assume that if even half of those people are right, we still have a serious problem, and it needs to be addressed, and it needs to be observed, and we need to find solutions for it. So I firmly believe everything that Coach has said today is completely supportable in many senses. So I totally support Coach in this conversation.
oh, thank you. I appreciate you so much.
Yeah,
Um,
love you guys. I got to go.
bye bye.
Yeah, bye, Steve.
So I think, I mean, I've certainly had a good conversation with you. I don't think that we've come up with a better solution um, than affirmative action. I think there are some do's and don'ts when it comes to affirmative action. That's for sure.
All right. So thank you very much, Coach Love, for coming. Interesting conversation with you. So, well, you know what? I would still want to have a conversation with you on this, especially after you've supplied me with your data. I really want you to get me that data because I'm after truth, I'm after understanding, and if I see any piece of information that is challenging my current understanding of anything at all, I really want to get into it so that I know exactly that okay, this is the state of things. But
Hmm.
from the way I'm coming from my understanding of my understanding of things, my understanding of affirmative action, it seemed as though affirmative action was allowing people who were not as qualified to get into certain positions because they were of a certain ethnicity, or because they were of a certain skin tone, or because they were of a certain gender, or whatever characteristics that is used to determine that affirmative action position. But you have you've opened up my horizon that that's certainly not the case. But so what is left now for you to do is to, back it up with data, and then I'll give you the thoughts. But
Well, I
great
will say
conversation.
this. I would say this. The good old boy system is the system that allows people to come in the door without qualifications.
Mm,
That is the system that would say. I would say that if you lined up, because I don't think you're wrong that affirmative actions is sometimes used that way. I don't agree with that use of it, but I definitely agree with that it is used that way. However, I would say however many times affirmative actions is used that way, the good old boy system has been used that way about 10 times as much, uh, and quite a bit longer, for hundreds of years longer. So I I just find it fascinating that we want to rush to examine the the affirmative action system instead of examining the good old boy system, which has far more problems. And it would be great if someone asked for data and statistics on that particular system. And
good.
that is not a government system. That is just the general operating
Mm.
system that we are under. So anyway,
Well, coach.
oh, and lastly, I very much want us to um, start stop looking at affirmative action as not just a black and white issue, because it is very expansive, and you've noted it in your country. It's tribal, but I think in America people think of it as a black and white issue.
Coach Love, thank you very much for taking out time to talk with me today. I really
Thank you
enjoyed
for
this
having
conversation
me.
with you, and would be happy to do this again sometime in the future.
Somehow, I think Charles is cut off, and so I am going to say
Little Miss Speakers, Wolf, Steve, Mr. Pelu. Thank you all for coming to the stream today, and I'll catch you in the next stream. So it's bye for now.
bye bye for now.